Hello there guys, it's Joey, and today we're going to be doing a wildcrafting haul, and we're going to kind of do it in a little bit of a different way. So I decided to do this because I've recently wildcrafted a few different bits and pieces, one being over the spring equinox, which I couldn't video because I was a little bit under the weather, but I still managed to have a little bit of a wildcrafting time on the equinox, as well as a little bit of a meditation outside in the garden. And I was thinking about this and I was like, well, why don't we talk about things that I have wildcrafted recently or been gifted by the garden recently, and then talk about wildcrafting as part of a witchcraft practice, as in honouring the earth and developing a relationship with the plants, and some different ideas about different aspects of wildcrafting, as well as the meanings, of course, of each particular plant, flower, root, branch, depending on what it is, and then sort of musing around the ideas of wildcrafting, because how accessible is wildcrafting to each and every one of us? Some things are going to be accessible, some things are not going to be accessible, and the sort of natter on about that a little bit as part and process of this wildcrafting haul. Okay, so from the spring equinox, the garden was quite forthcoming with quite a few things that were gifted that were on the ground, and generally speaking, this is how I prefer to wildcraft from the garden, unless I'm requiring something. So something that I didn't take from the ground was actually some holly. I'm just going to pop it in. There we go. I keep them all in sealed bags, labelled sealed bags for the most part. So this, there you go, is actually some of the stem and some of the leaf, and I've chopped it up and ground it up a little bit for ease, because holly or tin, is, as the ogum is quite sharp, quite prickly. So for the equinox I was gifted a few bits from the garden, and this was one, and I actually went and sort of sat and spoke to the holly, because I think it's important to develop a relationship, particularly with the energies of plants and trees in your vicinity that you work with a lot, or that you harvest from quite a bit. There are books and things that will recommend that you absolutely sort of request things from every energy of every plant and every tree that you come into contact with, and where possible I think it's a good idea, but particularly when you are living nearby particular plants, flowers or trees, and that you harvest from a little bit here and there quite a lot, I think having a respectful relationship with the energy of that plant or tree is quite important. And some people are quite disdainful of this idea, but to me I think that to disregard plants and trees as having life just because it's not the same life that we attribute to ourselves or to animals is a little bit misguided. Everything on this planet has its own energy, its own life system. There are plenty of scientific evidence to suggest that plants communicate, and just because it's a different form of life doesn't make it any more or less valuable. So when I'm working with the garden that I have access to, technically I'm not allowed to plant anything because we live next door to the landlords, and that's how it is. And the only thing I've planted is a lavender plant, which is in a pot. So I have to work quietly, quickly and with respect, and can't take an awful lot from the garden. So I went and had a talk to the holly tree, because I wanted some holly for a particular reason, which is the same reason as I wanted a couple of other bits that will be in an upcoming video. We're going to do some crafting and recipes together. And the holly was happy for me to take some, as long as I trimmed off a few of the bits of it that had become kind of diseased. A few leaves that had been and looked like they were diseased, and the holly requested that I spend some time taking some of the diseased leaves off and removing them from its sphere. So we did that. And the way that I sort of get that image is that I sort of sit with or stand by or sort of, sometimes I will speak to them, and sometimes it's more of an internal dialogue and just stretching out my energy and seeing if any feelings or any images or any thoughts come to the forefront of my mind. And that's how it worked with the holly. So let's see what the meanings are given as in the Herbal Compendium. We're talking a lot about Candlemas, Yule, okay. Holly belongs to the small collection of herbs which have strong historical lore that have become part of our Western heritage. Holly has become bound to the observance of Yule. In a modern herbal, Grieve informs us that this custom dates to the Druids, who decorated their huts with evergreens during winter as an abode for the sylvan spirits. We know that holly was given as a desired gift during the Roman festival of Saturnalia. Holly is very important in the folklore of the British Isles. In the Irish tree alphabet, the holly is tin, or T, the 8th tree. Grieve describes it as the most important of those evergreen plants brought into holiday celebration and folklore. In contemporary customs, holly, which has been used to decorate the temple at Yule, is kept sacred until the fires are lit at Candlemas, and then it is burnt in the cauldron. Many traditions work with the Holly King, a variation of the Green Man or fertility figure. The holly is the most important herb in Irish lore. In the White Goddess Graves cites the romance of Gawain and the Green Knight, in which the Green Knight is an immortal giant whose club is Hollybush. The prominence of holly within religious belief dominates many European cultures. Yada 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 yada. Holly is an ideal herb to fashion into a wreath to welcome a new priest or priestess into the community. Despite the wonderful illustrations which romanticise the wearing of holly, it is not well suited for human flesh. It's a pokey plant. Pokey holly, gotta catch 'em all. There is a good deal more to holly than its leaves. It can grow into a good-sized tree. I have a tree outside of holly. Well suited for the magic of the creation of a ritual knife and a magical staff. It can both attract and repel. Powerful defense when needed, and can protect the circle and cherish the gentleness within. Okay, I'm just going to plug the camera in, one moment. Okie dokie, so to carry on from a more Ogham perspective, holly or tin is to do with unifying strength, restored balance, restored direction, communication, unconditional love and responsibility. It will help you restore direction in your life, uniting past actions with present actions and past lives with present lives. It has the ability to unite two sides of a question or problem and help you find a balanced solution. It will provide you with the raw energy to deal with draining emotional entanglements. Bach wrote, "Holly protects us from anything which is not unconditional love. Holly opens the heart and unites us with divine love." So there you go. So I'm quite fortunate. There's a couple of holly trees that have sprung up outside, presumably since before I was here. And they're not massive, but they're, I don't know, junior type. So, and they spring up a lot. There's one that's actually just started springing up right outside the back door, sorry, with all the other trees, so I'm keeping an eye on it. But yeah, so obviously you have to be very careful when harvesting holly leaf, as it's quite spiky. And I would only take I wouldn't take too much, particularly because obviously from plants that are growing outside your space or nearby and that you can form an attachment with and a communique with, you don't want to be overstocking, you don't want to be taking too much, you know, it's a giving and receiving process. And that being said, it's quite frequent and normal and natural to offer gifts back to the spirits of the plants. How you do this is entirely up to you and how you best feel about it. There are many different ways in which you can give back to the energy of a plant or tree. So in the holly's case, what the holly wanted was for me to take some of the diseased leaves and things away, which is basically an act of giving. And that was fine. And I asked what it wanted in return, and that's the energy, that's the feeling, that's the thought process that I gained when I was working with the holly. For other plants or trees, that they require different things. Some quite like offerings of water. Is water something that is necessarily, you know, are they dying for water? No, not in England at any point probably. I give a bit more water in the evenings in the summertime when it's particularly warm, but generally speaking, it's more to do with the giving of life. It's the giving and receiving of life. It's an energy exchange. So water's another one. Sometimes it's just time, effort, speaking with them. I do leave crystals for the hawthorn tree. I work quite a lot with the hawthorn. We'll talk about that when we get to it, but I do leave crystals for that one. And then sometimes you can leave biodegradable offerings. Again, that's really up to you and what your particular tree or plant or energy is giving. If you grow your own in pots, it might be wise to keep crystals within the pots anyway to help the growing process. We're going to talk a little bit about crystals in another form in a minute. So the next one I'm going to show you that I wildcrafted again. I'm not going to get it all out because there's a bit more of this. Alright, at the spring equinox, and the spring equinox, by the way, was a triple energy, so it was spring equinox, new moon and solar eclipse, which is when I was gifted these things. So the next one is ivy. Ivy leaf and ivy bark. So with the garden, quite frequently I find things that have been discarded by the landlords when they've chopped things down. And obviously, whilst they're gardeners, they don't see it the same way I see it, and so they often throw lots away, and I quite often recover it and try and reincorporate it and try and honour it more than it was done so by them. It's not that they disregard a lot of the garden, it's in their mind things need cutting back, which it does, but in a lot of circumstances sometimes you will go to particular areas and you'll find things that have fallen off because they've cut them down and then they've fallen off and not discarded them, and so then I take those with me. that tends to be more about the trees than the ivy. The ivy grows like crazy. Now, it was all up the side of the church next door at one point, and they actually cut that all down. I couldn't get any of that. But it grows back really strongly. Ivy is a tenacious little bugger, which is one of the reasons for me wanting it. It's really fantastic for protective work and survival work and sort of getting hooks into things that you need to come to fruition, like manifestation of things. It has a fierce, determined power and energy. It has the ability to bind many trees together and restrict passage through woods. It can eventually smother and kill a tree, even the mighty oak. So it's one of these plants which can be used to destroy or create. It can represent the search for the self, the spiral journey upwards towards the heavens, the moon, however you want to see it. It is up to you to understand whether your wanderings restrict and bind or unite, clinging to one tree, one connecting. Yeah, basically it's a real sort of examine yourself type herb as well. That's more of the Ogham based energy. We will check what the compendium says, just for point of reference. I like to give you all a point of reference. It's not necessarily how I feel about it, it's not necessarily the correct one, but it's nice to have a point of reference. Again, maybe woven into wreaths, associated with the suit of pentacles, as well as a ritual tool. One for Beltane Eve, as well as being associated with Yule. Herb of consecration, herb of immortality, herb of love. So there you go. For me, and it has this real protective energy. It has the ability to really strangle out anything that is not helpful, and you can really get into it in that way. It's a warrior plant. And again, its usage is entirely up to how you best engage with it. So this is a good place for me to talk about the fact that I actually imbue all of my herbs that I wildcraft before I sort of put them away. And if you're on Facebook or Twitter, then you know that I have shared pictures of this exact thing, but with some of the others as well. So I use my labradorite for ivy, and it will go in the bowl, and then and pulling my energy through and popping the energy into the ivy itself. So I do this with all crystals and herbs. Now, you can keep crystals with your herbs if you so desire. You put a little tumblestone in them if you so desire. I tend to just imbue and interweave the energies of a crystal as I am harvesting them into bags or into powders or into smaller bits. And labradorite for ivy makes sense to me in terms of the spiritual journey. So labradorite has this temple energy, and the temple energy of shape-shifting and moving through realms and moving through stages of life. And ivy has that similar growth through spiral energy. It has a very sort of spiral labyrinth-esque spirituality behind it, as far as I'm concerned. It helps us to connect to our ability to overcome and labradorite does that as well. It has an almost Avalonic energy synergy between the two, as far as I'm concerned. Ivy very much speaks to me of the Nine Ladies of Avalon, or the Nine Morgans, considered by some to be the nine faces of the Morrigan. And for me, that sort of shape-shifting energy comes into play here as well, with labradorite and ivy. Okie dokie. Ivy is one you have to keep an eye on in the garden, and it feels a little bit like a responsibility to me, that I have a responsibility to the rest of the garden to make sure the ivy doesn't get out of hand as much as I can. I can't do too much because obviously it would cause a problem and cause a fuss if I did. Okay, so then the next one, this was actually on the ground. By the way, all of these things went into a dehydrator. It was recommended to me to get a dehydrator for things like this, and I got one for Yule as a Yule present, and they are fantastic, and it wasn't an expensive one, so there you go. This is rosewood and rose hips. This was on the ground already at the Equinox. So this was just on the ground, and I sort of talked to the rose bush, and the rose bush was like, it's an offering for the Equinox, there you go. It was just a gift. And that was a crow flying right at the... I thought the crow was going to come at the window then, but I think it went in the roof. Pretty sure the birds are now in the roof, so there you go. They're following me. So let's have a look at the meanings of rose hips in particular from the book. I wonder if it gives a separate meaning. Possibly not. No. Let's try Cunningham then. Maybe Cunningham has different meanings. Oh, excuse me. Guessing it doesn't. That's a bit annoying. Rose hips are used in healing spells and mixtures. So healing as well as love magic for roses in general, and supposing. I think rosewood is a protective wood, personally. For me it feels like it would be more of perhaps a protection of the heart, to protect the heart chakra from invasion, to protect yourself against those who would muck about with you on an emotional level. And for me, if I was going to imbue it, I might imbue it with a rose quartz for that. I might also imbue it with a garnet. Garnet being the love lust side, but it's quite a warrior protective energy as well, so it's about pure power as well. So I honestly think you could get away with that. That's probably what I would do. Right. So that was the rosewood and the rose hips. Healing, maybe healing work. Heal a broken heart. Things of that nature. I love the wood. there are some of the thorns on still. There, can you see? Bum, 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 bum. Let's put those back in the thing, and then we will show the next one. So the next one was actually not from my garden. It was another one of the rescue stories. So yesterday, no, not yesterday, yes, yesterday I shared this on Facebook. It was from a week ago, over a week ago, that next door is a church, and outside on my driveway somebody had discarded a posy of daffodils. And I was like, that's a shame, and picked them up and brought them in and dried them. So they were already like cut. There you go. And so I brought them in and dried them because it seemed to me a real shame to sort of use these beautiful flowers in sort of presumably some sort of offering or spiritual meaning, and then to just discard them like that, thrown on the driveway. And I was like, okay, well. So daffodils are used for love, fertility and luck. The altar is placed the flower is placed on the altar during love spells or carried for this purpose. Placed in the bedroom, it can increase fertility. If worn next to the heart, good luck shall surely come your way. So there you go. That's from Cunningham's book. So wildcrafting isn't always necessarily about gathering things from your garden or from wild places. Wild places are a little bit more of an experience, a little bit more different, a little bit more difficult in a lot of senses, because then you have to figure out what's okay to take, which, you know, how you're honouring and respecting those places, how you're developing a relationship with certain places. Are you only there as a one-off? So do you just give an offering to the land and thank it for its bounty? You might be better off in those circumstances only taking what you can find already on the ground or already falling off and that sort of thing. Whereas you can harvest a bit better in places where you are a regular visitor to and can build a relationship with the energies of the plant, tree, flower life. Right, so then the last thing, I believe, is the aforementioned hawthorn. So, I have a long-standing relationship with my hawthorn tree. Okay, so this starts off that everything for the hawthorn tree that was harvested, this isn't everything, goes on the pentacle. This is my homemade working triskel. Ugh, I can't do that without completely mucking up the cloth. So there you go. Everything starts off going on the triskel for part of the imbuing process. Most things do, but when working through the stages of harvesting and collecting everything to do with the hawthorn. Right, so this is actually still in progress. So these are the larger branches, these are the thorns, and then these is the smaller branches, which I'm in the process of taking them apart so I have more of a bark to work with. And these were all from the ground, I believe. Yes, they were all from the ground. And I have a much more frequent relationship with the hawthorn. I work with hawthorn a lot. I adore it. And the hawthorn tree outside my door is quite a chatty little bugger. So every day and when I go out, I will place my hand on the hawthorn and wish it a good day or a good morning. And it's just a sign of respect every single time I go out there. I leave that hawthorn, which I would give a more masculine energy, crystals. And I place crystals, like, I only get the very small ones, the chips and things, and place them on the ground and leave them there in offering. and I tend to sort of place them out of sight a little bit, so you know nothing's going to remove them or get in the way, as well as offerings of water and communique and talking to the protective energies of Hawthorn itself. So this is also going to be part of an upcoming recipe that we're going to share, we're going to talk about. Let's see what the book says for reference. Fertility, love, invocational to Bladaweth, Cardia, Flora. It has a strong magic. It provides a most desirable wand, but one must work with its diva. The Hawthorn is closely associated with Beltane. My wand, my Morrigan wand, was a piece of Hawthorn that was gifted to me. And these are all pieces that were also gifted that were on the ground. It's beautiful. Right, so that's all that book says about Hawthorn. That's a bit... I can't imagine that... Okay, masculine, Mars, fire. Powers of fertility, chastity, fishing magic, and happiness. Once used to decorate maypoles. At one time, hawthorns were believed to be witches who had transformed themselves into trees. Has long been used to increase fertility, incorporated into weddings. Hawthorn protects against lightning, and the house in which it resides no ghost may enter. It also is powerful for protecting against storms. The Romans placed hawthorns in the cradles of the children to guard from evil spells. Hawthorn is sacred to the Fae and is part of the Triad of Britain, oak, ash and thorn, where all three trees grow together. It is said one may see Fae. So that is actually interesting, because it's actually from the Celtic. Oak, ash and thorn is associated with portals to the other world, which relate to the Celtic gods and their transcendence into Fae through the sort of Christianization of stories. And for me, the hawthorn is a tree of the Morrigan. It's a warrior tree. It has thorns. All the thorny trees are hers. Thorny, thorny, thorny tree. And it has the duality of the love energy, the sexual energy of Beltane, as well as the warrior energy. So that is a really strange noise outside. It's a low-flying airplane. That doesn't happen very often. So as far as I'm concerned, it is a Morrigan tree. It has this incredible protective energy. It ties into the energy of the Morrigan, and I give it an offering to her. I think it is a tree of power, a tree of lust, a tree of love, a tree of blood, of energy, of life force. You can use it for all sorts of magic, but protective vibes are probably the most frequent thing to do with this particular bark and the leaves and things. I just love it. I love hawthorn so much, and that tree outside is my bud. Tree jokes! Tree jokes! So yeah, so that's it for the wildcrafting video. I just thought it would be interesting to show a few bits and pieces that I've wildcrafted recently, as well as talk about some of the processes involved in being respectful to the plants and trees themselves. So that's it.